What was supposed to be a routine flight turned into a shocking controversy when a flight attendant accused a black doctor of not belonging in first class. But just when she thought she was in control, everything took an unexpected turn. Dr. Marcus Gray, a highly respected physician, was questioned, humiliated, and even had security called on him all because one flight attendant refused to believe he was who he said he was. But when a medical emergency struck mid-flight, the very man she doubted was the only one who could save a life. What happened next sent shockwaves through the airline industry, went viral across the internet, and left the flight attendant facing consequences she never saw coming. Could she repair the damage, or had she destroyed her future forever? Stay tuned as we unravel this powerful story of prejudice, justice, and redemption. Before we begin, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a new video. And tell us in the comments, where in the world are you watching from? Dr. Marcus Gray settled into seat 2A in the first-class cabin, adjusting his reading glasses as he pulled out a medical journal. He had an important conference ahead, where he would be presenting breakthrough research on emergency cardiac response. But for now, he just wanted to enjoy a quiet flight. A voice interrupted his thoughts. "Excuse me, sir, but I need to check your ticket," said a blonde flight attendant with a stiff, professional smile. Marcus glanced up, slightly surprised. He reached into his jacket pocket and handed her his boarding pass. The woman, whose name tag read Becky, scanned the ticket, then narrowed her eyes. "First class," she muttered under her breath. Marcus caught the hesitation in her voice. He'd seen that look before, the doubt, the unspoken question. How did you afford this seat? He chose to ignore it, giving her a polite nod. "Yes, that's correct." Instead of moving on, Becky frowned. She glanced at the empty seat next to him, then back at his ticket, as if double-checking for fraud. "I'm just making sure everything is in order," she said, though her tone suggested something else entirely. Marcus sighed, realizing where this was going. "Here we go." Again. Across the aisle, an older white businessman in seat 2B was watching with interest. He leaned in. "Let the man sit, Becky. If he has a ticket, that should be enough." Becky stiffened, clearly annoyed at being called out. She handed the ticket back to Marcus, but before she left, she said something under her breath. "Just making sure we don't have any misunderstandings." Marcus exhaled slowly, forcing himself to stay calm. The first-class cabin was relatively quiet as passengers settled in. The hum of polite conversations and the clinking of glasses filled the space. But Marcus couldn't ignore the side glances Becky kept throwing his way. Then, another small incident. When the drink service began, Becky approached the row ahead of him with a bright, friendly voice. "Would you like a glass of champagne, Mr. Adams?" The man in seat 1A, a younger white professional, smiled and accepted. Becky poured the glass, nodding warmly. Then she moved to Marcus. Her demeanor changed instantly. "Would you like water?" Marcus raised an eyebrow. "I'll have the champagne, like everyone else." Becky hesitated for a fraction of a second before forcing a tight-lipped smile. She poured the drink, but moved on. Quickly, as if eager to be done with him. Across the aisle, the businessman in 2B shook his head slightly. "Some people never learn," he muttered. As the flight continued, Marcus tried to ignore the unease creeping up his spine. But it became impossible when Becky returned a third time, this time with 2 security officers in tow. "Sir, we have a concern about your seating arrangement," she announced loudly, her voice carrying through the cabin. Passengers looked up, confused. Marcus set down his book and folded his hands. "What exactly is the problem?" One of the security officers, Lieutenant Daniel Carter, stepped forward. He was a tall black man in his 40s with a strong, steady presence. The moment he laid eyes on Marcus, his expression shifted from neutral to shock. "Dr. Gray," he said, blinking in disbelief. Now it was Becky's turn to look confused. "Wait, you know him?" Carter straightened. "Yeah. This man saved my life 6 years ago after a car crash. I wouldn't be standing here if it weren't for him." A heavy silence settled over the cabin. Becky's face paled. Marcus sat back in his seat, watching her reaction with quiet amusement. "Still think I don't belong here?" he asked. The businessman in 2B chuckled under his breath. But Becky wasn't ready to back down yet. "I was just following protocol," she insisted. Carter turned to her, frowning. "What protocol exactly? Asking a doctor to prove he belongs in first class? Calling security on a paying passenger with zero cause?" Becky opened her mouth, then closed it. She was floundering. Marcus picked up his book again. "Unless I'm under arrest, I'd like to finish my reading." The businessman in 2B grinned. "Smart man." But the night was far from over, because just then, a loud scream echoed through the cabin. A passenger had collapsed near the restroom, clutching his chest. And now, the woman who had doubted Marcus's credentials was about to beg for his help. A piercing scream shattered the uneasy silence in the first-class cabin. Passengers turned their heads toward the aisle near the restroom, where an older man had collapsed, clutching his chest. His face was pale, his breathing shallow. A woman, his wife, perhaps, was sobbing hysterically beside him. "Somebody help. He's not breathing," she cried. For a moment, everything stopped. The flight attendants froze, passengers stared, and the low hum of the engines was the only sound filling the space. Then, in an instant, Marcus was on his feet. His years of medical training kicked in before his emotions had time to process the irony of the situation. Just minutes ago, he had been treated like a fraud. Now, he was expected to save a life. He crouched beside the man, swiftly checking his pulse. Weak, erratic. "He's in cardiac arrest," Marcus shouted. Passengers gasped. Becky hesitated, still lingering in the middle of the cabin, her face drained of color. Marcus turned sharply to her. "Get me the emergency medical kit, now." Becky didn't move. She was still trying to process what was happening. I should call for a medic when we land," she stammered. Marcus's jaw clenched. "He doesn't have time to wait. If I don't act now, he'll die before we reach LA. Still, she hesitated. Then, a voice behind them snapped Becky out of her daze. "For God's sake, let the man work." It was the businessman from seat 2B, standing with arms crossed. Other passengers murmured in agreement, their patience with Becky running out. Becky's lips parted as if to argue, but then she saw the cold, unyielding look in Marcus's eyes. Without another word, she turned and ran toward the medical supply cabinet. Within seconds, another flight attendant, Sophia, arrived with the AED automated external defibrillator and a first aid kit. She knelt beside Marcus, handing him supplies as if they had worked together for years. "Charging the AED," Marcus announced as he ripped open the man's shirt and placed the electrode pads on his chest. The machine beeped, analyzing the heart rhythm. Clear. A jolt of electricity surged through the man's body. His wife sobbed harder, gripping the armrest of a nearby seat. No response. Marcus stayed calm, pressing 2 fingers against the man's neck. One more time. Charging again. Becky was standing frozen a few feet away, hands clenched into fists. For once she had nothing to say. Clear. Another jolt. A pause. Then a cough. The man's eyes fluttered open, his chest rising in uneven gasps. A collective sigh of relief swept through the cabin. The wife threw her arms around her husband, crying uncontrollably. Marcus exhaled, wiping sweat from his forehead. His pulse is stabilizing, but he needs a hospital as soon as we land, he instructed. Sophia nodded, immediately contacting the captain to alert emergency responders at LAX. Passengers erupted into applause. Some clapped, others whispered in admiration. Marcus leaned back, suddenly aware of the eyes on him. "You saved his life," the businessman in 2B said, shaking his head in amazement. Marcus gave a modest nod. "Just doing my job." But not everyone was impressed. Becky stood near the aisle, arms crossed tightly over her chest. Her face was unreadable, but her silence spoke volumes. Marcus turned to her, voice calm but firm. "Still think I don't belong here?" Becky's mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. Before she could come up with an excuse, the captain's voice crackled over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we will be making an emergency landing in Los Angeles. Medical teams are on standby." We thank you for your patience." The tension in the cabin eased, but something had permanently shifted. Marcus returned to his seat, picking up his book as if nothing had happened. But he wasn't the only one affected by the night's events. Passengers stole glances at Becky, who had gone from authoritative to exposed in the span of one flight. And she knew it. Her grip on the serving tray tightened. She didn't just make a mistake, she had humiliated herself in front of an entire plane. But the worst was yet to come, because someone had captured everything on camera. And by the time they landed, the world would know. The plane touched down at LAX, its wheels screeching against the tarmac. Inside the first-class cabin, the tension was still thick, hanging in the air like an unspoken truth. The moment the seatbelt sign turned off, passengers pulled out their phones, eager to send messages or check notifications. But Becky Thompson had bigger problems. She stood near the exit, stiff as a board, watching as paramedics rushed in to assist the passenger Dr. Marcus Gray had saved. She had been waiting for this moment, the chance to step in, regain control, save face. But no one was looking at her. All eyes were on Marcus. The paramedics, upon recognizing him, immediately shook his hand. "You're Dr. Gray, right? We've read your research on emergency cardiac care," one of them said with admiration. "Thanks to you, we'll have a stabilized patient instead of a fatality," another added. Passengers murmured in agreement, some even snapping photos. Becky's stomach dropped. Then it got worse. A man in business attire, wearing a name tag that read David Larkin, senior flight supervisor, stepped onto the plane. His sharp gaze immediately found Becky. "Miss Thompson, a word." Passengers exchanged knowing looks. This was bad, as Becky followed Larkin toward the galley. She stole a glance at the passengers. Some were whispering, others were blatantly staring. She could already feel it. Something had spread, something big. Her fears were confirmed when she noticed Sophia speaking with a group of passengers, pointing to her phone screen. One of them, the businessman from seat 2B, shook his head with a chuckle. "Unbelievable," he muttered. Becky's chest tightened. She had to fix this. Inside the galley, Larkin closed the curtain behind them and folded his arms. "Miss Thompson, would you like to explain why multiple passengers reported an incident involving racial profiling?" Becky's heart pounded. "Sir, I was just following protocol," she insisted. Larkin didn't blink. "I've reviewed the reports. A black doctor in first class gets singled out, questioned, and then security is called on him for sitting in his own seat." Becky felt trapped. "I wasn't sure he was—" Larkin raised a hand, cutting her off. "Don't," he said, his voice cold. "I watched the footage." Becky's breath hitched. "Footage?" Larkin nodded grimly. "A passenger recorded the entire interaction. It's already online, and it's spreading fast." Becky's face went pale. Outside the plane, news crews were already gathering. By the time Becky reached the terminal, her phone was buzzing with alerts. She hesitated before unlocking it. The first thing she saw was a trending video with the title, "Flight Attendant Calls Security on Black Doctor, but he ends up saving a life." 3.4 million views. She clicked on the video, her fingers trembling. The footage was damning. Her voice sharp, condescending, demanding proof that Marcus belonged in first class. The humiliating moment when security recognized him. And the worst part? The chaos when a real emergency happened, proving just how wrong she was. The comments were brutal. She really tried to play gatekeeper, and now she's the one getting locked out. Imagine being this racist and this bad at your job. Karma hit her before the plane even landed. Becky's ears burned. She felt exposed, powerless. For the first time in her career, she was the one being judged. She looked up, scanning the terminal. More cameras, more reporters. People were pointing at their phones, whispering. And then she saw him. Dr. Marcus Gray stood near the baggage claim, calm, unreadable. He wasn't on his phone, wasn't arguing, wasn't seeking attention. He had already won. Becky took a shaky breath, fighting the urge to scream. Because deep down she knew, this was only the beginning. Becky Thompson had never felt this exposed. The airport terminal buzzed with murmurs, fingers pointing, eyes darting toward her. Everywhere she turned, passengers were glued to their phones, scrolling through the video that had turned her into the villain of a story she had never expected to be a part of. Her hands clenched into fists. "This isn't fair," she whispered under her breath. She hadn't done anything wrong, had she? She was just following procedure, making sure everything was in order, right? But the truth stared back at her through every headline flashing across the airport screens. Flight attendant causes scandal after racially profiling black doctor. Dr. Marcus Gray saves a life after being treated like a criminal. Social media erupts. She should be fired immediately. Her stomach twisted, and then her phone buzzed. She hesitated before checking the notification. It was a message from her manager. "Report to the airline office immediately." Becky swallowed hard. This wasn't just some minor incident anymore. This was a career-ending disaster. The airline's corporate office inside the airport was a cold, gray space, eerily quiet despite the chaos happening just outside its doors. Becky sat stiffly in front of David Larkin, the senior flight supervisor who had confronted her on the plane. His expression was unreadable as he reviewed the incident report on his tablet. Then he looked up. "Do you have anything to say for yourself?" Becky cleared her throat. "Sir, I was just trying to do my job. I didn't mean to what?" Larkin cut in, raising an eyebrow. "Embarrass a paying customer? Call security on a man who was minding his own business? Treat a world-renowned doctor like a criminal in front of an entire plane." Becky's mouth went dry. I didn't know who he was," she admitted. "That's exactly the problem," Larkin said flatly. He set his tablet down and leaned forward. "Let me be clear, Becky. This is bad. Really bad. The airline is already getting flooded with complaints. People are calling for your termination. Sponsors are threatening to pull deals. We have never had a PR nightmare spread this fast." Becky's pulse spiked. "I didn't mean for this to happen," she whispered. Larkin sighed. "Intentions don't matter. Perception does. And right now, the world sees you as a racist flight attendant who abused her authority. This could cost the airline millions. In damage control." Becky felt nauseous. "So what happens now?" she asked, voice barely above a whisper. Larkin folded his hands, his next words like a punch to the gut. "Effective immediately. You are suspended without pay, pending further investigation." Becky's chest tightened. "Suspended," she repeated, as if saying the word out loud would somehow change it. "Yes," Larkin confirmed. "HR will contact you regarding next steps. But between you and me, I wouldn't hold my breath for a second chance." The words echoed in her mind. She had worked for 10 years to build her career in aviation, climbed from junior attendant to one of the most senior staff on international flights. And now it was slipping away because of one mistake. When Becky left the office, the world outside had only gotten worse. Reporters were waiting. Cameras flashed as she stepped into the terminal. "Miss Thompson, do you have any response to the accusations? Do you regret calling security on Dr. Gray? Are you aware that people are demanding you be fired?" Becky pushed through the crowd, heart pounding. She needed to get out of here. She reached the employee exit and stepped outside, gulping in fresh air. And then her phone buzzed again. A new notification. Her hands shook as she read it. "Your name has been added to the industry blacklist. Effective immediately. You are barred from applying to major airlines pending further notice." The final blow. She was officially unemployable in the only field she had ever known. Becky staggered back, pressing a hand to her forehead. Her career was over. And the worst part? Dr. Marcus Gray had walked away from this with his dignity intact. But Becky? She had lost everything. Becky Thompson sat in her small apartment, staring blankly at the news broadcast on her television. Her own face was plastered across the screen, alongside damning headlines. Flight attendants suspended after racial profiling scandal. Calls for termination intensify as video of incident goes viral. Dr. Marcus Gray speaks out. No one should be treated this way. Her stomach twisted. Her rent was due in 2 weeks. Her savings wouldn't last a month. And now, no airline would hire her. Becky's phone buzzed. She glanced at it, already knowing what to expect: more hate. Thousands of messages. Some from strangers calling her a racist, others from people she had worked with, suddenly distancing themselves. Unbelievable, she muttered, tossing her phone onto the couch. For 10 years, she had built her career with dedication and discipline. Now, it had all crumbled in a matter of hours. There has to be a way out of this, she whispered. And then an idea struck her. Becky wasn't going to sit back and watch her life fall apart. If she couldn't fix her reputation, she'd have to fight back. Grabbing her laptop, she searched for a crisis management lawyer, someone who specialized in reputation repair. A name popped up: Elliot Burns, PR and legal expert. His website boasted a history of turning scandals around. Becky didn't hesitate, she called. After 2 rings, a smooth voice answered. "This is Elliot Burns. How may I help you?" "I need a lawyer," Becky said. "I assume this is about the flight attendant scandal," he asked, already knowing. Becky grimaced. "Yes. Can you fix it?" Elliot paused, considering. "That depends. Are you looking for real damage control, or do you just want to play the victim?" Becky bristled. "I am a victim. No one is talking about how this has ruined my life." Another pause. Then Elliot sighed. "Meet me at my office tomorrow. Let's see what we can do." The next day, Becky found herself in Elliot Burns' modern, glass-walled office. He leaned back in his chair, analyzing her like a chess piece. "The video is bad," he said bluntly. "You come across as condescending, dismissive, and frankly guilty." Becky's jaw tightened. "It was a misunderstanding. Doesn't matter. Public perception is reality," Elliot said. He tapped his desk thoughtfully. "The only way out of this is to change the narrative. You need to make people feel sorry. For you." Becky leaned in. "How?" Elliot smirked. "You go on TV. You cry. You say this incident has made you realize your unconscious bias. You call it a teachable moment. You apologize to Dr. Gray and express how deeply ashamed you are." Becky froze. "You want me to apologize?" "Not because you mean it," Elliot said, shrugging. "Because if you don't, you'll never work again." Becky swallowed hard. She wasn't sorry. She still believed she had only been doing her job. But the thought of losing everything? That scared her more than anything. After a long pause, she nodded. "Fine. I'll do it." Elliot smiled. "Good. Let's rewrite your future." 2 days later, Becky sat under bright studio lights, facing a well-known news anchor. Millions were watching. This was her chance to recover. The anchor began, voice sharp but neutral. "Becky Thompson, the world has seen the video of your confrontation with Dr. Marcus Gray. Many have called it racial profiling. Do you regret your actions?" Becky forced a deep breath. She had practiced this. "I deeply regret that my actions hurt Dr. Gray," she said, her voice shaky, vulnerable, practiced. She blinked, letting tears well up. "This experience has opened my eyes to my own unconscious bias. I never meant to offend or discriminate. I just want to learn and do better." The anchor didn't look convinced. "Many believe you only feel remorse because you got caught." Becky's stomach clenched, but she kept her expression sincere. "I can't control what people think. All I can do is apologize and grow from this." The interview ended. Becky exhaled. She had done it. But what she didn't know, Dr. Marcus Gray had just watched the entire thing, and he wasn't buying it. Dr. Marcus Gray sat in his office, arms crossed, watching Becky Thompson's televised apology play on his computer screen. The carefully rehearsed words, the strategic tears, the vague regret that never actually admitted wrongdoing. Marcus had seen real apologies before. This wasn't one of them. He exhaled sharply, clicking off the video. A knock on his office door pulled him from his thoughts. His longtime colleague, Dr. Vanessa Carter, stepped in, holding her phone up. "Please tell me you saw that nonsense," she said, shaking her head. "I saw it," Marcus muttered. Vanessa scoffed. "She never even said I was wrong. Just a bunch of, 'I regret that my actions hurt someone.' Translation? I regret that this ruined my life." Marcus leaned back, rubbing his temples. She thinks she can manipulate her way out of this. Vanessa's eyebrows arched. So, what are you going to do about it? Marcus hesitated. He wasn't the type to fuel media storms. He had his reputation to protect, his career, his patience. But something about Becky's performance didn't sit right with him. Because while she was out there trying to fix her image, she still hadn't taken accountability. And that was something Marcus Gray couldn't ignore. 2 days later, Marcus sat across from a well-known journalist on a highly anticipated talk show interview. Millions were watching. The journalist wasted no time. Dr. Gray, we all saw the video. We saw how you were treated. And now, we've seen Becky Thompson's apology. Do you accept it? Marcus took a breath. I appreciate that she acknowledges the harm caused. But an apology isn't about damage control, it's about making things right. The journalist leaned in. Do you believe she was sincere? Marcus didn't hesitate. No. The audience stirred. Social media exploded. An apology without change is just public relations, Marcus continued. She didn't apologize because she realized she was wrong. She apologized because she got caught. The journalist nodded, intrigued. What would real accountability look like to you? Marcus's voice was steady. A true apology isn't about saving face. It's about fixing what you broke. If Becky Thompson really wants to prove she's changed, let's see her put in the work. What kind of work? The journalist asked. Educate yourself. Support organizations fighting discrimination in the airline industry. Speak out against bias not just when it affects you, but when it affects others. And most importantly, stop playing the victim. The message was clear. Becky Thompson wasn't going to fake her way out of this. She had to earn redemption or she wasn't getting it at all. Within hours, Marcus's interview went viral. Social media platforms were on fire. Dr. Marcus Gray just called out Becky Thompson's fake apology. And he's absolutely right. An apology without action is meaningless. Well said, Dr. Gray. If Becky really wants to prove she's changed, let's see her do something real. And then, the worst for Becky, a new trending hashtag. Hashtag, Do Better Becky. Her plan was backfiring. Becky sat in her apartment, phone in hand, watching her screen flood with angry comments. She had thought the apology would make it all go away. Instead, Marcus had just made it worse. She called Elliot Burns, panicked. What do I do? He's destroying everything. Elliot sighed on the other end. Becky, I told you this wasn't going to be easy. The public doesn't want words. They want action. Becky gritted her teeth. So what? I just let them ruin my life. Elliot was silent for a moment. Then, he said something Becky never expected. What if you actually try to change? Becky froze. What? You keep saying you didn't do anything wrong. But what if you actually listened to what people are saying? What if, instead of just playing the victim, you actually did the work? Becky stared at the wall, her chest tight. She had spent so much time defending herself that she had never actually thought about what she had done. Now she had a choice. Fight against the truth? Or finally face it? Dr. Marcus Gray sat in his office, arms crossed, watching Becky Thompson's televised apology play on his computer screen. The carefully rehearsed words, the strategic tears, the vague regret that never actually admitted wrongdoing. Marcus had seen real apologies before. This wasn't one of them. He exhaled sharply, clicking off the video. A knock on his office door pulled him from his thoughts. His longtime colleague, Dr. Vanessa Carter, stepped in, holding her phone up. Please tell me you saw that nonsense, she said, shaking her head. I saw it, Marcus muttered. Vanessa scoffed. She never even said I was wrong. Just a bunch of, I regret that my actions hurt someone. Translation? I regret that this ruined my life. Marcus leaned back, rubbing his temples. She thinks she can manipulate her way out of this. Vanessa's eyebrows arched. So, what are you going to do about it? Marcus hesitated. He wasn't the type to fuel media storms. He had his reputation to protect, his career, his patience. But something about Becky's performance didn't sit right with him. Because while she was out there trying to fix her image, she still hadn't taken accountability. And that was something Marcus Gray couldn't Ignore. 2 days later, Marcus sat across from a well-known journalist on a highly anticipated talk show interview. Millions were watching. The journalist wasted no time. "Dr. Gray, we all saw the video. We saw how you were treated. And now, we've seen Becky Thompson's apology. Do you accept it?" Marcus took a breath. "I appreciate that she acknowledges the harm caused. But an apology isn't about damage control, it's about making things right." The journalist leaned in. "Do you believe she was sincere?" Marcus didn't hesitate. "No." The audience stirred. Social media exploded. "An apology without change is just public relations," Marcus continued. "She didn't apologize because she realized she was wrong. She apologized because she got caught." The journalist nodded, intrigued. "What would real accountability look like to you?" Marcus's voice was steady. "A true apology isn't about saving face. It's about fixing what you broke. If Becky Thompson really wants to prove she's changed, let's see her put in the work." "What kind of work?" the journalist asked. "Educate yourself. Support organizations fighting discrimination in the airline industry. Speak out against bias not just when it affects you, but when it affects others. And most importantly, stop playing the victim." The message was clear. Becky Thompson wasn't going to fake her way out of this. She had to earn redemption, or she wasn't getting it at all. Within hours, Marcus's interview went viral. Social media platforms were on fire. "Dr. Marcus Gray just called out Becky Thompson's fake apology. And he's absolutely right. An apology without action is meaningless. Well said, Dr. Gray. If Becky really wants to prove she's changed, let's see her do something real." And then, the worst for Becky, a new trending hashtag. Hashtag, "Do Better Becky." Her plan was backfiring. Becky sat in her apartment, phone in hand, watching her screen flood with angry comments. She had thought the apology would make it all go away. Instead, Marcus had just made it worse. She called Elliot Burns, panicked. "What do I do? He's destroying everything." Elliot sighed on the other end. "Becky, I told you this wasn't going to be easy. The public doesn't want words. They want action." Becky gritted her teeth. "So what? I just let them ruin my life." Elliot was silent for a moment. Then, he said something Becky never expected. "What if you actually try to change?" Becky froze. "What? You keep saying you didn't do anything wrong. But what if you actually listened to what people are saying? What if, instead of just playing the victim, you actually did the work?" Becky stared at the wall, her chest tight. She had spent so much time defending herself that she had never actually thought about what she had done. Now she had a choice: fight against the truth, or finally face it. Becky Thompson had expected anger. She had expected Marcus Gray to sit across from her in that coffee shop and unleash the full weight of his resentment, to tell her that she was beyond redemption, that she had already sealed her fate. Instead, he had given her something far worse: a choice. "You can't fix what you did," Marcus had said, "but you can change what you do next." Now, as she sat alone in her apartment that evening, Becky turned those words over in her mind, feeling the weight of them settle like stones in her chest. Could she really change? Would anyone even believe her if she did? Because, in the eyes of the world, she wasn't just a former flight attendant. She was a symbol of everything wrong with people like her, the ones who had the power to enforce the rules, but only ever seemed to enforce them selectively. For the first time since the scandal began, Becky wasn't thinking about herself. She was thinking about the people who had been in Marcus's position before, and the ones who still would be, long after the world forgot her name. The next morning, Becky made a decision. If she wanted to prove she had changed, she couldn't just say it. She had to show it. Pulling up her laptop, she did something she had never done before. She donated half of her savings, the little she had left, to an organization that fought against racial bias in the airline industry. Then, she wrote an open letter, not to defend herself, not to beg for forgiveness, but to finally tell the truth. She described what she had done, how she had refused to see her bias, how she had been so focused on her own survival that she had ignored the way her actions had nearly cost someone else their dignity and possibly their life. She admitted that her apology on television had been calculated, more about saving her own career than owning her mistake. She acknowledged that real change required real action. And she ended with a pledge: "I don't deserve a second chance. But if I ever earn one, it won't be through empty words, it will be through proving, day by day, that I can be better." When she clicked post, her hands trembled. This wasn't damage control. This was burning the last bridge to her old life and hoping that something better waited on the other side. Within an hour, Becky's open letter had exploded across social media. People were divided. Some still hated her, calling it a desperate attempt at redemption. Too little, too late. She only cares now because she lost everything. Nice words. Let's see if she actually follows through. But others saw something different. This is the first time she's actually taken responsibility. People can change if they're willing to put in the work. She's not asking for a comeback. She's asking for a chance to be better. That's rare. For the first time since the scandal broke, Becky wasn't trying to control the conversation. She was just letting the truth speak for itself. And then, something happened that she never expected. A comment appeared beneath her post. "Dr. Marcus Gray, this is a start. Let's see where you go from here." Becky stared at the screen, her breath caught in her chest. He wasn't forgiving her, but he wasn't closing the door on her either. It wasn't redemption. Not yet. But maybe, just maybe, it was the first step toward it. Becky Thompson had expected silence. Or worse, more hate. But Marcus Gray's comment beneath her open letter had changed everything. "This is a start. Let's see where you go from here." It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't a free pass. But it was an opportunity. And Becky wasn't going to waste it. Becky spent the next week doing something she had never done before. She listened. She attended seminars on racial bias in corporate spaces, sat in on airline industry discussions about discrimination, and even spoke to former colleagues who had privately admitted they had seen similar incidents happen but had never spoken up. She reached out to passengers of color, asking about their experiences. Many were hesitant to talk to her. Some ignored her altogether. Others gave her blunt, painful truths. "I don't think you actually care. I think you're just trying to fix your image. You expect a pat on the back for realizing something Black people have dealt with their entire lives." Becky took it all without argument. For once, she wasn't trying to defend herself. She was just trying to understand. And slowly, very slowly, people started to believe she was serious. 2 weeks after posting her letter, Becky received an unexpected email. Sender: Dr. Marcus Gray. Subject: "Let's talk." Becky's pulse spiked as she read it. "I see you've been doing the work. Let's meet." A time, a place. No further explanation. Becky didn't hesitate. She replied with one word: "Yes." The coffee shop was quiet when Becky arrived. Marcus was already there, waiting. Unlike their last meeting, he wasn't just studying her, he looked curious. She sat down, unsure how to start. Luckily, Marcus spoke first. "So, you've been busy." Becky nodded. "I had a lot to learn." Marcus took a sip of his coffee. "And?" Becky exhaled. "And I get it now." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Get what?" Becky hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "That what I did to you wasn't just about that one moment on the plane. It was about every time someone like you is treated like they don't belong. Like they have to prove themselves in ways that others never do." Marcus didn't react immediately. Then he nodded. "That's a start." Becky frowned. "But it's not enough, is it?" Marcus leaned forward. "Becky, real change isn't about saying the right things. It's about what you do when no one is watching. The real question is, when all of this dies down, when people forget your name, will you still care?" Becky swallowed hard. "I don't want to go back to who I was," she admitted. Marcus studied her for a long moment. Then he pulled something out of his bag and slid it across the table. Becky looked down. It was a job application. Her eyes widened. "What is this?" "An opportunity," Marcus said. "There's a nonprofit that focuses on fighting racial bias in air travel. They need someone with industry experience. Someone who understands the system from the inside." Becky's hands trembled as she picked up the paper. "You think they'd take me?" Marcus shrugged. That's up to you. But if you want to prove you've changed, this is your chance. Becky felt her chest tighten. This was it. Not a shortcut, not a way out, but a real chance to rebuild. She looked at Marcus, her voice barely above a whisper. Thank you. Marcus simply nodded. Don't thank me yet. Prove it. And with that, he stood up and walked away, leaving Becky alone with the most important decision of her life. Becky Thompson sat in her apartment, staring at the job application Marcus Gray had handed her. She had spent her entire life in airline service. It was all she had ever known. But this was something entirely new. A nonprofit dedicated to fighting racial bias in air travel. The irony wasn't lost on her. She had been part of the problem. Now, she was being offered a chance to be part of the solution. But was she ready for that? Would people ever really accept her in that role? Becky set the application down and rubbed her temples. This wasn't just about finding a job. This was about who she was going to be from now on. And for once, she wanted to make the right choice. The next morning, Becky walked into the offices of Equity in Air Travel, the nonprofit Marcus had mentioned. The waiting room was small but professional. The walls were lined with posters of real passengers who had faced discrimination stories just like Marcus's. Becky felt a familiar shame creeping in, but she didn't let it consume her. She was here to do the work. A receptionist greeted her with a polite but cautious smile. You're Becky Thompson? She knew who Becky was. Everyone here probably did. Becky nodded. Yes, I have an interview with Ms. Patel. Right this way. Sitting across from Mira Patel, the director of a nonprofit, Becky felt a rare sense of nervousness. She had done hundreds of interviews before, but never one where her past was the biggest obstacle in the room. Mira folded her hands on the desk. You're aware that hiring you would be controversial? Becky nodded. I am. So why should we take that risk? Becky took a deep breath. Because I know exactly how the system works. I know the loopholes. I know the way bias hides behind standard procedure. And I know how to help change it. Mira studied her, skeptical. And why do you care now? Becky's jaw tightened. Because I should have cared before. For a long moment, Mira said nothing. Then, she slid a folder across the desk. You'll start as a consultant. Temporary contract. No promises beyond that. If you're serious, you'll have to prove yourself. Becky exhaled. That's all I'm asking for. And just like that, she had a second chance. Not in the way she had expected, but maybe just maybe in the way she needed. Months passed. Becky kept her head down and did the work. She helped review airline policies, identifying hidden biases that led to profiling. She spoke to flight attendants and pilots, sharing what she had learned from her own mistakes. And slowly, something changed. People stopped seeing her as just the disgraced flight attendant from that viral video. They started seeing her as someone who was trying to make a difference. One evening, as she left the office, her phone buzzed. A message from Marcus Gray. Marcus, I hear you're making progress. Keep going. Becky smiled. She still had a long road ahead, but for the first time in a long time, she knew she was headed in the right direction. And that was enough. Becky Thompson's story reminds us of an important lesson. Change isn't about words, it's about action. We all have the power to grow, to challenge our own biases, and to make the world a little better, but only if we're willing to do the work. If you found this story powerful, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss another video. And before you go, tell us in the comments, where in the world are you watching from? We love hearing from our viewers all across the globe. Subscribe now, and we'll see you in the next story.